My name is Tanny Crane. I am President and CEO of Crane Group, but most importantly today, I am a huge advocate, along with every single one of you, it's really preaching to the choir, of early education, quality early education. We are so delighted you are here today for our first ever Community Roundtable, co-sponsored by the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy, by OSU and the City of Columbus. So this is a proud moment for this organization, and we hope that you enjoy your time, that is thought-provoking, but most importantly that you also participate. Tomorrow will be our first ever museum from the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Education. That's a long name. Crane Center. And really talking about the need for quality pre-K. We have brought the best and brightest professors and instructors from around the United States that have enormous experience that can help us share best practices. But today is really about here in our community. And we have in our audience the best and the brightest, of course, educators, folks from the public, from the private institutions, from business, community leaders, to really talk about the real need and value of early education. So it's wonderful that you're here. I am just going to make one shout out because we have a visitor from Washington, D.C. that came especially for this. Sarah Watson, if you would stand for a moment. She is the Executive Director for Ready Nation, and that is a member organization that truly believes in building business and our economy that can only happen through quality early education and education of our youth. It is a membership organization. Sarah has lots of information for anyone who's interested, and she'll have it at one of the tables afterwards, but she has worked tirelessly on behalf of our children nationwide, so we thank you for being here, Sarah.
No cost, no fee. I can say the most important thing is I am a proud mother of a graduate of the College of Worcester from last May.
There you go. So now I'm going to get off the stage, but it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the most incredible person, and that is a distinguished professor from the OSU College of Education and Human Ecology, and that is Laura Justice. I asked her for a bio, and she gave me one line. Like, seriously? But she is talk about advocacy, of an applied researcher, really focusing on early childhood education, and particularly children at risk. She is the Executive Director for the Crane Center and also the Executive Director of the Schoenbaum Center. So if no further ado, I'd love to introduce Laura Justice.
Okay, thank you.
Give her a round of applause.
Thank you for coming out today. I wish it was sunny and 80, but it's not. It's
Better
close.
being in here.
But we're all in here where it's warm and cozy. Thank you, Tanny, for kicking off this community conversation today. Many, but not all of you, probably know Tanny Crane and her very serious advocacy for early childhood in our community. And the idea for this roundtable actually started in a conversation between Cheryl Uchterberg, my dean, Tanny Crane, and myself. And here we are several months later, and the turnout is outstanding. We're very happy you're all here. I want to acknowledge also our partnership with the City of Columbus, Rhonda Johnson and her staff in the City of Columbus's Education Department were really instrumental in helping us think about what this roundtable should feel like, as well as what the outcomes would be subsequent to our community roundtable today. And so at this moment, the outcomes, we plan to write a white paper that will summarize the conversation here today and hopefully lead us to the next steps that will happen after this initial conversation takes place. I also wanted to mention that today is a preamble in part to the symposium on children, which will happen tomorrow. And we have distinguished lectures by researchers who are really leaders in the field who have come to OSU and will be speaking tomorrow. You are all invited to that. And if you don't have information about the symposium after the event's over today, please just let me know and I'll put something in your hands that will get you there. You're all welcome. As I mentioned, the goal of this roundtable is to start a conversation regarding how to effectively expand early childhood education in Columbus and across the state so as to create the most effective and sustainable system possible. Everybody in this room is in the space that involves early childhood education, and everybody sitting here is playing a very important role in some way. And we need to have opportunities to learn from one another the best directions to move forward as our city and our state and indeed our nation moves diligently to increase access to and participation in high quality early childhood education. My job is to share with you how today is going to work. In a moment, I'm going to stop talking. And what I'm going to do first is turn the mic over to Steve Vota. Steve Vota is the Executive Director of Learn for Life, a cradle-to-career organization here in Columbus that's doing instrumental work in pulling together all the key players in the space of school readiness and early childhood education. And we asked Steve to kick off today by sharing with us where we are as a community. When we think about early childhood education, how many kids are we talking about? Where are they being served? And to get us primed for thinking about this topic. So Steve will spend about 10 or 15 minutes sharing with us his perspective from his work in our community. We will then turn the mic over to Fred Anderle, who, did I say that right? We are thrilled to have here today as our moderator. He had a talk show on WOSU TV for many years that many of you probably listened into. People get very excited when I share that Fred is here. I think we've all watched his show. He's a very skilled moderator who will keep today running smoothly. What Fred will be doing is using a discussion guide that you have in your folder that identifies the 3 topics that we hope to begin to discuss together today. And those have to do with funding in early childhood, staffing, as well as quality. So those are the first topics we'll be starting to chew on as a group with Mr. Anderle moderating that discussion. He will rely for the first hour on our panelists who represent research and policy. And after about an hour of a moderated discussion, he will move to a question and answer session that can involve all of you. After the question and answer session, we do invite you to participate in a reception that will be here in this room, and we can all be together as late as you want, but we definitely till 6 if you'd like to stay. I am to mention that if you are tweeting, I don't know what that means, because I don't tweet, but we do have a hashtag. I don't even want to encourage you to do this. You should be paying attention to what's happening. But I will put this here if you want to be tweeting about the day. I'm going to turn this over to Steve Vota shortly. And before I do, I just want to express my very sincere gratitude to our panelists who have traveled to be here. They've set aside time in their calendar, so I thank you for that. And let me thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us in this conversation. So, Steve?
Great, thank you. Oh, well, never mind. Well, thank you for joining us here today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the state of early childhood education services here in Columbus and Franklin County. To set the stage and the context for the discussion, I'm going to review quickly some of the challenges we face, then a brief overview of the services that we have in our community, and then also share some of our successes. So to start, Columbus is the home to 62,500 children under the age of 5. That is actually 72% of all children under the age of 5 in Franklin County. However, we have a challenge. Since 2005, 34% or more of our children entering Columbus City schools have scored on the lowest band of the crawl. As you know, the crawl is the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment for Literacy. If you look at the trend of Columbus City children, you can see that on that red line, I don't have a pointer here, but if you look at the red line, you can see that in the last 2 years, we've had a significant increase actually in the number of kids who are scoring in the lowest band of the crawl. What we did at Learn for Life, we got the school attendance zones from Columbus City schools, and we tried to map out where children who scored in the lowest band live in our community. And so we colored those neighborhoods orange, so you can see in the map on the left in 2011-12, those neighborhoods in our community that had the highest percentage of children scoring in the lowest band of the crawl. And then you can see in 2013-14 in the orange areas how that has grown. So not only have we had more kids scoring in the lower band of the crawl, it's also impacting more neighborhoods. So that's our challenge. So now I'm going to review real quickly some of the programs and services that we have in our community. So in Franklin County, there are 640 center-based programs. They have a capacity to serve 29,000 preschool children, and those are children ages 3 and 4. Within the city of Columbus, there are 385 center-based programs with a licensed capacity to serve 13,698 children. Now, if you remember, Columbus has 72% of the children, but yet it does not have 72% of the early learning capacity. Again, there's more capacity in the suburbs than there is actually in the city of Columbus. We partnered with Action for Children to do some analysis of all the early learning centers in City of Columbus zip codes and what their capacity was. And we also looked at census data to see how many children lived within those zip codes. When we look at that data, it appears that there are over 11,000 3- and 4-year-old children within the City of Columbus zip codes that do not have access and are not being served by an early learning center. When you get into the cost of care, it varies greatly throughout the community. We have some part-day programs that cost roughly $3,000 to $4,000 a year, all the way to some very high-end programs that cost up to $14,000 to $15,000 a year. However, according to Action for Children, the average cost of a year of early learning care is $8,504 a year. Now, just as a point of reference, the cost of tuition this year at Ohio State was $10,000. In terms of funding, I think that to figure out funding for early learning centers, you need a PhD in early learning funding because it is all over. But according to Franklin County Department of Jobs and Family Services, approximately $141 million is spent on publicly funded center-based care in Franklin County. And this comes from a patchwork of federal, state, and local dollars that have a complex set of rules and regulations regarding each funding source. However, Columbus is making progress. Since 2012, an additional 1,278 children now have access to early education services. Columbus City Schools added 10 additional pre-K classrooms last year in targeted neighborhoods serving up to 200 children. And what Columbus City did was look at the map where those high-need neighborhoods were and opened centers in those neighborhoods. We also have 8 community organizations that partnered together to initiate SPARK, which is a home visitation program working with parents and children who don't have access to early learning centers. Last year, they served over 200 children. The state recently added 378 half-day spaces in 24 center-based programs here, and that was last year. And then this year, with the support, thanks to our mayor, we are adding an additional 500 early learning slots here in Columbus. So we are making progress, and that is great news. Our community is also making additional strides to enhance the ability of teachers and parents to better support their children. Through United Way and Columbus Kids, we have done developmental screenings over the last several years to 16,000 children. Through Nationwide Children's Hospital Reach Out and Read program, we distributed over 36,000 new books to young children. We've hosted 3 early literacy conferences to over 500 early learning teachers. We provided focused professional development opportunities to early learning teachers as well through the Ready for Success initiative. And then in partnership with Action for Children, we initiated a coaching program for early learning children as well, early learning teachers in 43 different centers. And those centers were primarily in those high-risk neighborhoods. Through Columbus Metropolitan Library and their Ready to Read program, they are serving over 320 children monthly. And then we partnered with the Crane Center and Learning Circle to really dig into the correlation between the 3rd grade OAA scores and crawl scores. And what we found was pretty fascinating. We looked at 10,000 children from Columbus City Schools and took their 3rd grade OAA scores and then matched up to see how they did 4 years earlier on the crawl. And what we found that if children scored band 3 of the crawl, which is the highest level, they were 8 times more likely to pass the 3rd grade OAA test, which is significant. And that is really the challenge before us. How do we get those children ready to go so that when they walk through the doors of kindergarten, they're ready to begin learning to read? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how our community is using research, data, and professional support to enhance those efforts of young children. So Learn for Life recently partnered with 22 different agencies for a Ready Success and a Spark initiative. Ready for Success is really a coaching initiative working with early learning teachers, and Spark is a home visiting initiative working with parents. It's a multi-pronged approach, really trying to help parents and teachers develop the skills of young children before they enter kindergarten. What we did this past year is assess 1,300 children with the Get Ready to Read assessment. We did the assessment in the fall, in October, and we gave those results to all the teachers, to the centers, to the parent advocates in those respective programs. And then through Action for Children, we partnered to do coaching and professional development with those teachers. We then did a post-test at the end of the year. It was in May. And here are the results. And this is what gives us a tremendous amount of hope. When we did the pre-test, you can see that 40% of the children in the Ready for Success program were below average. The red area is below average. In the Spark program, 43% of those children scored below average on Get Ready to Read. When we did the post-test at the end of the year, we can see significant progress. The percentage of children who scored below average on the post-test was 18% in Ready for Success, and in Spark, it was 19%, which was significant progress that those kids made. When we look at, this is the range of scores on the pre-test, and when you look at the progress that these children made on the post-test, it's pretty amazing. The average gain per child was 5 points. We also had the opportunity through this to look at what was the impact of coaching. And so we were able to see, we had some classrooms that did not receive coaching as well as some that did. And what we were able to do is go back and look at the scores of the children who did not have who were not in a classroom that received coaching versus those that did. And again, those centers that got the coaching, those children did significantly better. So this is great news because this says that if we invest in teachers and we invest in parents, we can move the needle. So to summarize, our community has many children that start their educational journey unprepared. We are increasing capacity, but it is not enough. Additionally, through examples like Ready for Success and Spark, our partners are making significant strides using data and evidence-based practices to drive instruction. and our community is working better together for the benefit of children. I'm going to close with a quote from Marian Wright Edelman from the Children's Defense Fund. It's investing in children is not a national luxury or a national choice. It's a national necessity. The issue is not, are we going to pay? It is, are we going to pay now up front, or are we going to pay a whole lot more later on? That's the question. So I want to thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Fred, now. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. So the question for the panel and for you today is, how can we effectively expand early childhood education in Columbus and across the state? And let me introduce our panel, beginning on the left. Senator Peggy Lehner is State Senator for the 6th Ohio Senate District. She is Chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Education. Welcome. We're welcoming also, of course, the Mayor of the City of Columbus, Michael Coleman. Good to have you here. Dr. Stephanie Currington is Assistant Professor of the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. Welcome, good to have you here. Dr. Andrew Mashburn is Associate Professor in Applied Developmental Psychology at Portland State University. Good to have you here in Columbus. Dr. Hiro Ishikawa is Courtney Salem Ross University Professor of Globalization and Education at New York University Steinhardt. Good to have you here as well. Dr. Angel Rose is Early Childhood Education and Development Officer in the Office of Ohio Governor John Kasich. Thanks for coming. You already read Ms. Tanny Crane, President and CEO of the Crane Group. Good to have you on the panel. And Dr. Laura Justice, Executive Director of the Crane Center for the Early Childhood Research and Policy. Good to have you here, of course, as well on the panel. Well, let me begin by saying that a number of our panelists, of course, are researchers in the field, and they, with hundreds of scholars, recently signed a consensus letter called Investing in Our Future, the Evidence Base on Preschool Education. And one of the conclusions was that preschool programs that parents can afford, many of them fail to meet quality standards. So beginning with Dr. Andy Mashburn, question, what are some of the things that go wrong? Why do they fail so frequently to meet quality standards? And what are some of the things that we can do about it?
I think an important thing to think about is, what do we mean when we talk about high quality early childhood education? And if I were to ask you what is high quality early childhood education, I would probably hear 100 different things that are all valid responses to that question. I think that from my perspective and from a developmental perspective of young children, it's the moment-to-moment, day-to-day interactions and relationships that they experience in their classrooms. That is the mechanism by which education is going to promote these outcomes. And more particularly, what kids need is emotionally supportive interactions. What kids need is rich instructional inputs. What kids need is well-organized experiences. And I think one of the places where we tend to fall short in particular is in the instructional support domain. And in large part, I think it has to do with the fact that that's a really challenging thing for an early childhood educator to do when she's working with 20 or 25 young kids to provide the individual supports that young kids need. So I think in part it's a challenge to be able to provide those interactions, while at the same time those interactions are coachable, are teachable, and can be improved through mechanisms like professional development and support.
Talking about professional development, Dr. Yoshikawa, you studied the Boston public school system, among others, and but also looking at some of the private centers. Your teachers are paid near minimum wage. They really don't have the kind of training that Dr. Mashburn is talking about. And they leave frequently. There's a lot of turnover. So how do you get the training to those teachers, and how do you pay for getting the training to those teachers?
Well, first of all, I think the systems that are addressing this across the community provider and public school and Head Start systems are working on the equity issues, which are pretty glaring as far as salary compensation, qualifications, as well as supports. So you can think about providing the same quality of professional development across systems, which I think some places are really starting to do, and Boston is conducting its an expansion of its very highly regarded coaching and curricula into the community provider system. It's also instituting salary increases to try to address some of that big gap between public school teachers and community providers' salaries. So those are two kinds of steps that some systems have taken.
I'd like to, Ohio has a quality rating and improvement program. It's online. You can find it online. Step Up to Quality. And Dr. Angel Rhodes at the governor's office, well, we want to provide these teachers with training and more experience and money. But where do you think, in the statewide picture, where is the money in particular going to come from? That's going to be very expensive to do, right? How do you raise people up from $8 an hour to a reasonable standard and health insurance, et cetera, and then get them training on top of that? Where will that money come from?
Well, one of the first things that we need to do is a better job of layering our different funds. As was said earlier by Steve, so many of our different silos of funding have numerous restrictions around them and how they can be used and how they cannot. One of the things that we're doing at the state is looking at each one of those and figuring out, can we layer them? Can we push for some of those restrictions to be pulled off? Can we find a more creative way? If we can do that, we can be able to layer that funding in a better manner in which we're able to serve more children and we're able to fund them at a higher level. It's a matter of figuring out how to get those restrictions off and to layer them. And so that's one of the biggest things that we're looking at.
So get the money released, in other words.
Yes, yes.
If you get those silos taken down and that layering removed and the restrictions removed, will there be enough money? Even so?
Not from any one source. We're not going to be able to depend completely on federal assistance, state assistance, local assistance. It's really going to take all coming together if we're going to be able to lift this up. So any one area won't be able to do it on their own.
Dr. Laura Justice, is there any, do we have any success stories in Ohio or elsewhere where we've looked at teachers in early childhood who've been paid little and had very little in terms of skills, and that's been changed, that circumstances have changed?
That's a really good question. Can I punt this one to Andy Mashburn?
Sure.
Too, because I was wondering if you could share a little bit. A success story to me is one that overcomes some of the complexities of layering, like you just referred to. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about Georgia, because you have experience with Georgia, which I believe covers early childhood expansion through the lottery.
It does, yeah. So when I first got into research on early childhood education, it was in 1997 in Georgia, and 3 years before a policy was passed to create the Georgia Lottery. And as part of the Georgia Lottery, there were 3 educational initiatives funded from the lottery, one being the Georgia Pre-K program, the other being the Hope Scholarship, and the third being development of some infrastructure of schools. And it's been 20 years since that law was passed, and it created a universal pre-K program. And it was the first universal pre-K program in the country. It serves about 60% of all 4-year-old kids in Georgia, regardless of their economic background. And it has been a successful model of continuing to support early childhood education. There have been questions and discussions when the population increases of 4-year-olds and how are we going to expand the pool, but it's been sustainable for 20 years now. And I think the key to that is the dedicated funding. It's dedicated solely to that purpose. It doesn't go to a general fund that's then being picked apart from different sources.
Yeah. And Mayor Coleman, we have, I know, a pretty successful pre-K program in Columbus, right? But tell us more.
Let me add on to what was said. I'll talk about a success story in the making. And it relates to the CCEC administration, Angel, Rhodes, and City of Columbus, Ronald Johnson, and crew. We set aside $5 million for pre-K. The first time the City of Columbus ever jumped in this space, and we decided to jump in big. And our idea was to create as many slots as possible for pre-K in the city. And so we approached the state. And the state, now, they're the experts, I'm not. But I'll tell you what I think I know. You tell me if I'm wrong. But that we had our money and the state had its money, and they're really 2 different programs. I think theirs was a half day, and we wanted to go full day. So we matched up the state's half-day money with our money, and we created a full day for, I don't know, another 300, 200 kids, something like that. And that's an example where the state has its resources, we have our resources, we brought them together, and there were we had a different program, different idea on pre-K. State had a different idea, all with the objective of providing quality pre-K for kids. That's the ultimate objective. And the parties came together and created a full-day effort for another 200 or 300 kids in the city of Columbus. That is, on top of the fact that we have a Democratic mayor and Republican governor, and we put all those issues to the side, and I have to give Angel Rose, the governor, and my folks credit for pulling this together in a way that now there's 200 or 300 kids that'll be ready for life as a result of this. And the bureaucracy around pre-K and around government generally is about as frustrating to me as I've seen. But that was all cut through, all came together, and it's an example of a good example of something that's in progress that's working really well. And I tip my hat to Angel Rose and the governor for being a great partner with us.
Senator Linda, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I totally agree with everything that's been said so far. However, I think it's very important that we acknowledge that the pre-K environment, it's a new sector. We haven't funded it before. It's been funded at very minimum levels. So we are looking, you cannot begin to adequately fund early childhood education without a commitment of substantially more money. It's not going to be able to be done by simply removing some of the layering that we have. That's important, and we need to do that. It's not going to be able to be funded solely with public-private partnerships. It is going to take a significant commitment on the part of multiple layers of government, local, state, and federal. And that's only going to happen if it becomes the top priority for funding streams. I don't think there's anything else that we have out there that we have the evidence to support the return on the investment that we will get from early childhood education. I always find it interesting. We spend money all the time in Columbus, not you guys, but
the state legislature.
Right. Without asking for proof that it works. And yet when it comes to early childhood, we have to go through every hoop under the sun to prove that it works. And that's the way it should be, but we don't require it of every other aspect. So I think we just have to accept the fact this is going to take money, it's going to take a lot of it.
And she's exactly right. Resources and funding is the bottom line for pre-K in Columbus, in the state, and the nation. We set aside a lot of money, $5 million. We're serving just 500 kids. And that's like $8,400, $8,500 per child, but that is a great return on our investment. And there's so many other kids that need access to pre-K that we're not able to reach for one reason alone: money. We got partnership with the state, who stepped up big time, and the governor. The city stepped up big time, the school system stepped up. We need resources from multiple sources, and we cannot necessarily rely on any one source to ensure that we have it.
Fred, can I just?
Yeah, sure.
Just two comments. One is, I do think that even Steve showed that there has been success in this one small program in Columbus, and those were with Head Start teachers, those were private, public, in Columbus City schools that through intensive coaching, we didn't pay them more, but intensive coaching of teachers, we have shown some great results in terms of quality. I think that one avenue that we're certainly pursuing here is the access of data. And as Senator Lehner said, we always have to demonstrate more than any other area I've ever seen, are we demonstrating quality? And I think now we have access to more data and we're using it. And I just want to share one other approach, as many of us have been in this field for so long, and I've just had a helicopter view, but we also have to be more creative because we continue to look for funding in the same places. And there is some success currently being piloted in a pay for success or social impact bonds. An example is in Salt Lake City, where how it works is an investor, in this example it's Goldman Sachs and Pritzker from Chicago, and philanthropists in Chicago, came together and committed to investing in a proven quality education program with the goal of reducing the number of kids going into special education. Demonstrating those results, the results are fewer teachers having to provide special education, we can return those investors' dollars and then continue to invest in quality education. So it's a way for, as the mayor talks so much about, a public-private partnership that speaks in business language, that is a return on investment, that again, Senator Lehner, we know that from the Nobel laureate James Heckman, that return on investment in early education far exceeds, anybody in higher ed, far exceeds any other education. So we have to be creative, Fred, as well, and look for other sources.
Let me ask you, Senator Lehner, let me ask you, we see Georgia has universal pre-K. And do you see, behind the allocation of monies, of course, is political will to raise and allocate the money. Do you see that happening, universal pre-K in Ohio, anytime soon? And if so, how would it be funded?
Well, first, I think we need to question, is universal pre-K what we really need?
All right.
And what we can afford. I mean, yes, it would be nice if every child had access to pre-K, but truthfully, most middle-class children have access. Parents are currently paying for it. And I think the question shouldn't be, should the government or other entities assume that cost? Is that a cost that's too high to bear? So that's one question. So I think where I prefer to put my focus on is for those children that we know have a particular need. They do not have parents taking them to the zoo and to the library, et cetera, throughout the week, but the kids that are in most need. So it's that segment of our population that I think we need to find the money for. And not try to aim for the entire population.
Let's talk about what universal access means. In my view, universal access means that if you have the resources and your kids can access it,
that's universal.
That's great, do it. But universal access to me means that all children have access to pre-K. In some cases, the parents pay for it because they can afford it. In other cases, in most cases, parents can't. It's $8,500 a year. And that rules out most of those who live in this city. $8,500 a year is a college education. Ohio State's $10,000 a year. And so you got to put it in context. And my view is universal access is for everybody, but you don't pay for those who can afford it. And there's a lot of folks there too.
I would agree with that, but I think it's something that we need to sort of clarify what we are seeking. Because I don't know about Georgia, but Florida, I know it doesn't matter if you can be a multimillionaire, you get free tuition to preschool if you're a 4-year-old. I don't know if Georgia is the same way.
It is the same way.
That's the same way. So, I mean, they're spending, in looking at the statistics in Florida, they haven't really moved that kindergarten readiness needle all that well. Which is largely because they're paying for any program anywhere that you happen to go. And the importance is really on the quality of that program is more important. I'd rather pay for high quality for kids in need than paying for the experience for all kids.
Professor Kieran, does that make sense to you, defining access that way for middle-class parents who can afford it? Fine, they can pay for it, but for those who are low income and who cannot, the state steps forward and takes care of pre-K.
Well, I think that what we need to think about when we is thinking about how we can look, for one, I think we need to start thinking about sort of some of the knowledge that we have about Ohio in general. So there's research that I participated in, as well as some of my colleagues, that shows that Ohio has a history of these public-private partnerships in which there were Head Start programs that were partnering with private child care centers. And in terms of that research, the quality of the Head Start centers was raised through these public-private partnerships. My colleague Diane Schilder and I also did some work in the state a couple of years ago in which we were comparing child care centers that were partnering with the pre-K system versus those child care centers that were not. And we found that those child care centers that were partnering with pre-K actually increased in quality, specifically in terms of teacher credentials, using a standardized curriculum, and serving a more economically and ethnically diverse population. So I think when you're thinking about modeling your program here at the local level, one of the strengths that you have as a locality is sort of mixing these public and private partnerships. And we need to think more strategically about how we can serve low-income, ethnically diverse children in settings that are also serving middle-class, upper-middle-class children. Because I am a middle-class parent who pays for child care quality, and I would welcome more ethnic and low-income diversity in my centers. And I think that as part of the business community, as part of the policy community, we need to think of more ways for us to be able to do that.
How do you do that? Can you give an example of a center that you know of that has more ethnic and income diversity and a mix of middle class and low income parents, and how do they bring that about?
I think one of the ways in which we can do that is providing incentives for the private community to come to the table and offer slots, make slots available to the low income children. I can't think of concrete suggestions right off the list on my top of my head, but I mean, if you give me a day or so, I can come up with a list for you. But no, I'm just kidding. But I think that yeah, that is the thing. We need to provide incentives for these private child care centers to take in children, to take in the low-income children.
Could I,
Yes,
I
Lord
just-
Justice.
Because you asked, is this on? Well, I can talk loud. Because you asked for an example, the Schoenbaum Family Center, and there probably are other exemplars as well in Columbus and Franklin County, but the Schoenbaum Family Center is a early learning center on the Ohio State campus. We actually have 3 different early learning centers at OSU, but the Schoenbaum is very unique because it does blend funding streams. And so you have a center that serves about 100 kids. A number of the kids, the parents pay tuition, and it's in the higher range of what Steve was sharing. We have Columbus City School dollars, we have mayor dollars, thank you. We have Head Start, I'm sure you personally wrote that check. We have ODJFS dollars, and so, but there's a point I need to make, which is that in theory, it sounds amazing. And philosophically, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do by kids, to have these blended funding streams. Otherwise, we track kids and we say, we're gonna have 20 kids in this classroom and you're all from a low-income background. That's not right to do to young kids. The challenge is that every one of those funding streams has their own precise set of requirements. And so what you do, so ODJFS has these requirements, ODE has these requirements, and so on and so forth. And what goes into managing the assurance that every family meets the right requirements that are funding them to be in that program, it's highly burdensome. So part of the conversation about whether it's targeted or universal and blending and layering has to involve how to make this doable for a given center. And the Schoenbaum Family Center is a very small program. Think about another, maybe a larger effort like Columbus City Schools that wants to blend funding streams for 1,000 kids.
Dr. Yoshikawa, you have something to add here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple points that have been raised that are really important around what income diversity brings to classrooms. And there's some emerging evidence that that is good for kids, not just for society, but for their learning and development and their executive functions, which are things like attention. And I think if we think of kindergarten and how kindergarten expanded in the United States and became part of the public education system, there wasn't a feeling like, well, we should only provide kindergarten to the poor. it ultimately became a national commitment and a universal commitment. And so an additional, I think, reason for, aside from the fact that, yes, the second income quintile, which is from 20 to 40% of income, actually has just as low rates of enrollment in preschool as the poorest 20%. Nationally, and so there is certainly at least a lower middle class group that is being shut out because of the extreme expense of quality pre-K. And for a kind of sector of education that has such strong impacts on learning, I think we have to build what's essentially a universal audience and demand for it. And so for the cities and states that have done that, Oklahoma, Georgia, Boston, now New York City, what it means is you get the middle class together, with all of the city in understanding the value of high quality preschool, and that builds actually political will as well as being the result of political will.
Well, a question: if Georgia and Oklahoma can have universal pre-K, and even if you define universal pre-K as serving primarily low-income children, let's say, and middle-class parents paying on their own, what's stopping Ohio from having Georgia and Oklahoma are not necessarily known as terribly progressive states. Ohio is, and so no. Let me ask both the mayor and the senator: what's stopping Ohio from doing what Georgia and Oklahoma have done? I mean, specifically, why isn't the political will there?
Well, there is in my shop, for sure. We're using every available dollar for pre-K, but it's not just for low income. And you use the word middle income as those who would not be eligible. Under our scenario, middle income is, because middle income is struggling right now. And I talked about it's a college tuition to send a kid pre-K. And so our definition of universal access is much broader. And so we include the middle income in our definition of universal access. We don't exclude them. And it's because of the cost associated with pre-K. Now, having said that, our first attempt, this is our first year, and we're experimenting along the way. Our first attempt with this is we looked at those families that are $1 more than those who are considered in poverty. I don't know what that means. So what were we saying?
25%.
25%?
125%.
125% above the federal poverty line. And how much is that on a annualized basis for like a family of four? Like 26,000?
Yes.
That's $26,000 ballpark, right?
Yes.
For family of four. Represents about 120% above poverty. Think about that. 26,000 for a family of four, and they can't qualify for Head Start. Is that about right? Something like that?
Yes.
In the range. In that range. And so what we're trying to do is go for the folks who are $1 to make $26,001 and above. To get them the ability to access pre-K. And I'll never forget, when we first announced this, earlier this year, a lady who had 2 children, she couldn't go to work because if she went to work, she'd make too much money. And therefore, she couldn't send her kid to pre-K. So she said this saved her and allowed her to go to work while her children are in pre-K in the city's effort. And she would not be qualified as poverty under the federal poverty guidelines. So we include the middle income. And there is a struggle here, and the struggle is how much money. I mean, that is a practical deal we got to struggle with.
Well, let me, Senator Lehner, help me with this if you can. However you define universal pre-K, if Georgia and Oklahoma can do it, what's stopping Ohio from doing it? Is it political will? Is it lack of money? I mean, why can't we do it if they can do it? However you define it.
It's a question of priorities. It is also a lack of money. There is only so much money available unless you start raising taxes. But let me clarify. When I say poverty level, I'm not talking 100%. At that, I'm talking 200% below. So I'm including what you might call middle income. I consider that pretty darn poor. People that don't have access, and I like the way you put it earlier, that, make sure everyone has access to it, and that maybe if they can afford to pay for it, they pay for it. If they can't, their child shouldn't be denied. So we need to figure that out. Frankly, that's a problem I wish we had right now. Because right now we aren't funding anything except for, a small percentage of kids are currently getting funded. But I think, we need to figure out what that flashpoint would be, where we're willing to. But if you have $500,000 to spend, let's spend it on the kids who need it the most. If you have $100 million to spend, we'll spend it on everything.
Dr. Rhodes has something to say here. Dr. Rhodes, in the governor's office, again, the senator talks about willingness, and we're talking about political will, and Ohio as compared with Georgia and Oklahoma. What do you say? Why can't we get over the barrier and just do it?
So one of the things that has been difficult for us is that we did not have the infrastructure to, even if we dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Ohio 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we did not have the infrastructure to implement it and do anything effective with those. Ohio was recipient of the Early Learning Challenge Grant in the first run of federal grants that were distributed, and Ohio received the highest award, which was almost $70 million. And so over the past years, we've been able to improve professional development systems. We have been able to improve our quality rating system. We have been able to, much of these problems that we have with JFS and ODE, we're not completely there yet, but we've been merging those together. So we have a lot of the foundation created now, so that Ohio is in a position, we're applying for the federal preschool grant right now, and one of our selling points is because of the gains that we have made, we've had $32 million put in to add almost 5,000 new slots in for the last 2 years, because of the gains that we've made in figuring out how do we ramp up and where is this infrastructure, we're able to take a step forward with the federal grant. One of our selling points is the fact that, unlike other states, Ohio will be able to ramp up in 1 year, and we will be able to fill all of those slots as we move forward. So that's one of the things that's held us back politically because we needed the infrastructure. I would say now what we need to do is to continue to educate folks on the importance of early childhood. I think we have a lot, I'm constantly in the governor's office. He's always asking questions. Here's this, here's that, here's why this is important. But we need to have that across the board. Senator Lehner was sharing some wonderful ideas that she had and helping to educate folks in the legislature. But it goes beyond that, because children aren't loud and children don't vote, but their parents do. And so family engagement and getting systems out there that we are really communicating. One of the things that the grant has helped us to do is change the definition of family engagement. And now for us, that means providing information and resources to a parent through interactions that move them to take action on behalf of their child. So if we have parents bringing their voice to the table, that's going to move political will.
Do you first, Britt Kerwin, the former president of the Ohio State University, once said that he didn't think that Ohioans valued education to the degree, let's say, folks in Maryland do, to which he has returned. Tenny Crane, is that what's holding Ohio back here? Is it public opinion and lack of public support?
I think it's changing the conversation. And just as I cringe when I hear childcare, because it's really early education. And it's all, from a business person's point of view, early education is about economic development. It's really about jobs, because it starts early. And I think that changing that conversation can change the political will, but it has been a challenge to convince legislators, not Senator Langer, of course, but to think of, to change the conversation that early learning begins really at birth, but even if we can get to 3- and 4-year-olds. And talking about collaboration, which has been talked about, and Stephanie was talking about it, even here in Columbus, this early learning is a very disparate system, and Angel, you talked about it as well. And from a funding point, it's very disparate, but even from discussion at leadership levels. And we are working very hard in our community to bring voices together so that when early learning grants come, there is a single voice from Columbus. And that's really been led by our mayor of the city of Columbus, by Columbus City Schools, by the business community, by nonprofits and the public. But we have to have, and the families, as you talked about, Angel, we have to have one voice from the political will and advocacy, but we also need to have that stream of funding that Angel's talked about and Senator Langer's talked about.
So Tanya, when you talk to some legislators, they don't understand the value of early childhood education? They don't believe you when you say it's important for outcomes throughout life? What do they say?
Senator Langer talked about this. I'm not talking about you, Mayor. You're about to break in, but it is. I've had many discussions with legislators who want us to prove quality, and it is amazing that it is. I've never had these kind of conversations before, but as I shared with you, we do have data. We do have research that supports the value of quality early education. And I do believe we shouldn't be paying for early education if it doesn't support quality early education. But that's changing the conversation. So I have had conversations with legislators who still go back to child care. But
The big one they throw in all the time is that Head Start. There was a major study that showed that Head Start did not have an impact, or it had an impact, but it wore off by first grade. And I get that one thrown at me more than just about anything else out there.
Let me just say this.
Can I interrupt the mayor just for a second? Dr. Yoshikawa, Dr. Mashburn, you have the data, right? The quality early childhood education produces. If you were talking to a legislator and they didn't believe that, what would you say in terms of whether it's Head Start or pre-K or earlier than Head Start? What does quality early childhood education do? What would you say to a legislator?
So the current evidence, I think I would urge the legislator to think more broadly than simply test score effects of early childhood education. So it's true of the very famous Perry Preschool program, for example, which was followed, and the participants were followed for 40 years, that their test score effects faded out by, say, middle school, certainly, but it had very important effects on high school graduation, on reduced crime, and eventually earnings, and producing quite high returns on investment. So I think we need to think about the fact that early childhood education can affect issues like engagement, issues around socio-emotional development, around attachment to school that aren't fully captured, surprise, by standardized test scores in reading and math.
Better health outcomes as well?
Yes, there is some evidence of long-term health benefits from quality early childhood education.
Any measurement, what would you like to add to that? What could you tell the legislator?
I agree with everything that Hiro said. I also would like to mention that there's a recent article showing reduced blood pressure as a result of having been randomly assigned to the Abecedarian program as 40 to 50-year-old adults. But one thing I would like to point out, and I think it goes back to the Head Start impact study that you were describing, is that there were very strong, convincing effects of Head Start at the end of the Head Start year on cognitive outcomes for kids who are randomly assigned into this program. When you look at the counterfactual, the group that was not randomly assigned to this program, half of those kids went through either a Head Start program or another form of a public preschool program. So we're comparing, and it's not just apples and oranges here. In some cases, the oranges were a little bit like the apples to start with. But what I would like to point out, though, is that what that raises is that the effects are no longer found at the end of kindergarten, first grade, and third grade. And the question that's a question that really we should dig deeply into. Hiro has a nice hypothesis around, well, that's what we found in other studies, and what we're going to find the effects is on more social outcomes down the road. But it also should point us to thinking about not access to preschool, not just quality of preschool, but the maintenance of the impacts of preschool and the fact that these kids who are moving from a program and a system and a setting and early childhood education into a K-12 system that has different values and different instructional approaches and different qualities is a real barrier to what we're talking about. So alignment across these systems seems to be one of the key issues in making sure that we're going to have long-term impacts on the early investments that we're making.
Dr. Carrington, you've done studies as well, right?
Yes, so one thing that I would say about when we look at the long-term effects is that a lot of times when we're doing these analyses are based on sort of a group mean, a group average in terms of how that average child has done that attended one of these programs. And what I always like to say is sometimes the good story really lies in the outliers. For example, I am a proud graduate of a Head Start program, and I have given back to my community and to the early childhood community for my whole life. And I'm not the only one. There are others who have been very, very successful because of maybe that social-emotional foundation that we had, because of the health foundation that we had that helped us go on to survive and attend college, etc. So I try to push people to say, don't get so caught up in those averages and look at some of the outliers, right? Look at some of the stars of the success stories. And what I would also follow up to say is that what Andy just mentioned in terms of sort of looking at the quality of that K through 5th grade system is so key and so important because I have some recent work that shows that when we actually look at sort of the quality of the education environments in which the Head Start children are attending, they are still, even decades later, going into lower quality schools than their comparable counterparts who have gone to pre-K or to center-based childcare programs. And we've known this for decades now. We found this out in the 1980s with one of the Curry papers. So there is something that we need to do to sort of change these K through 5th grade environments to ensure that we have continuity.
I always find it fascinating that you blame Head Start, the gains, but you don't think to blame the K to 3 environment that costs them to lose them.
Can I talk about political will, Fred?
Yeah, sure. Briefly.
I'll be brief. I know, way back. Senator Liner is my hero in many respects. She stepped up big time for the city of Columbus, and I will always remember that, and I thank you publicly for doing that. But let me just say that elected officials can have every expert come in and have a conversation about how great pre-K is and what it means and all the data, throw it out there. But political will really is the ability to take action based upon the public's will. What does the public want? And the conversation about pre-K, and I love this group, and everybody's wonderful here, but this is like a preacher to the choir. Who in this room doesn't believe in pre-K? The conversation needs to be with the public. Why is pre-K important? And what are the obstacles, and why you, parent and community, need to be interested and engaged in the issue of your child going to pre-K. And when there's enough people saying the same thing, the politicians will act. And you will see political will. They'll define it as political will. It's really the public's will. And so, sorry.
Okay. Well, by the way, let's open it up now to questions from the audience. We'll have Elaine moving around here with the microphone, and if you just raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. We ask you to keep your questions brief, and we're happy to answer them, all the panel. We have all the experts here, the political leaders. Raise your hand if you have a question. If you don't, I've got some more, but presumably I think you might. Okay, nothing right now. All right. What? Yes, indeed.
Since no one else is asking, So I'm really interested in the concept of funding streams for pre-K, and background on me, I grew up in rural poverty, and a lot of our discussion today is focused on Columbus. So I know that the school systems in Ohio, at least in the past, were funded partly through property values. And when we bring in like business, private, public partnerships, how will we get businesses to invest in rural areas where maybe they're not based? If we're encouraging that as opposed to like an Ohio lottery system like Dr. Mashburn mentioned.
Anybody have some experience with that on the panel who'd like to speak to that, or at least conjecture about it?
It's a really good question that I don't know that we have the answer to. That is one of the things that we are working on. I just brought up the grant that we're applying for. One of the things that we're doing is an Appalachian pilot in our application, and we are looking for lessons learned. There are 5 different school districts, or not districts, but regions around a district that we're going to take up to scale if we get this approved. And we're hoping that these types of questions can get answered through that by creating learning communities, by speaking with businesses to figure out exactly how do we engage the businesses in those areas.
Okay. While we're waiting for the questions from the audience, and again, raise your hand if you have one. Yeah, we have one down front, Elaine. We have one in the back as well. Okay. Let's go right to you.
Hi, I'm Eric Kurlock at Action for Children, and my friend Larry Schweinhardt, who was instrumental in the Perry Preschool study, told me something that has really stuck with me, and that is that if you want what we got, you have to do what we did. And we tend to talk about pre-K and early learning and heck, even childcare, as if it's all one thing. So could you talk a little bit about bridging the gap between that all one thing and that phrase, if you want what we did, if you want what we got, do what we did. How important is the program versus the funding stream?
Okay. Andy Mashburn, maybe you'd like to address that.
Yeah, so the high scope Perry Preschool program that you're describing is a model program. It's a small scale program. It serves a small community in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And I think that the issue that you're raising is one of scalability. How do we take something that's somebody's baby or a bunch of people's babies to make it so that the day-to-day experiences are going to make a huge difference in the lives of the kids that they're serving, and have that be recreated across a state or across a nation? And I think, I don't have the answer to that. I think that in the science that we do, it's the implementation of the programs, it's the implementation of the services that matter more than anything. You can create the buildings, but if it's not implemented in a way that's going to serve kids' needs, it's not going to promote development. So I think that's a struggle that we all have, is going from model programs to something larger.
Dr. Stephanie Currington, something to add?
I would just say that when you think about the Perry Preschool Project, we know that they use the high scope curriculum. And I think about what I know about the high scope curriculum, where it was a curriculum in which it really strived to promote critical thinking skills. And when we think about our early learning programs today, we need to make sure that the curricula that children are exposed to are really giving them a solid foundation in critical thinking, and really giving them the opportunity to express their thoughts and their ideas verbally. So we're not just exposing young children to this sort of drill and kill mentality. I think that might get us halfway there.
Dr. Yoshikawa, what is your experience show?
This is a little preview of what I'll talk about tomorrow, but the new and I think very important evidence coming from evaluations of pre-K programs that are implemented at scale across states and cities is showing that 2 places did a particularly good job of raising instructional quality, and Professor Mashburn talked about the particular problems we have in this country with the levels of instructional quality as measured by a measure that he's done a lot of work on the class measure, a good observational measure of classroom quality. Instructional quality is particularly low in many multi-site studies that have been done across the country for preschool. The cities of Tulsa and Boston were able to raise the levels of instructional quality on that measure across their cities by about 2 or 3 standard deviations, which in kind of social science terms, is an enormous difference in terms of higher instructional quality implemented through a focus, really focusing in on instruction, no surprise, focusing on the interactions in the classroom, providing intensive coaching supports, much like what's being tried here in Columbus. And so those are the studies that I think are the exciting ones that I would now put alongside the Perry Preschool program, which was kind of an existence proof. Can you have these long-term effects from early childhood programs? Well, the big, millions dollar question is, can you implement that high quality at scale? And at least in these two places, it looks like a city, and then in the case of Tulsa, really that was within the Oklahoma statewide universal pre-K program.
We have a question down front here.
It's not really a question, it's a comment. And I'm sure it's open for more discussion at the symposium tomorrow. But as we talk about the funding stream, and Dr. Angel, you talked about having the systems in place for this expansion, staffing is huge. We do not have the teachers in Franklin County to handle the expansion. And that's going to be a huge piece. If we don't put something in place for that at the same time that we're looking at this funding base, that we're looking at this quality education, we can't expand. And we're at critical in this city right now, with some of the initiatives that have gone on, which are wonderful, but if we don't have the teachers, we still won't have the quality.
Let's go to our panel. If we don't have the teachers, do you agree with that, Dr. Justice? And if we don't have them, where do they come from? How do you cultivate them?
Well, I do think we have the teachers all over Columbus and Franklin County and the state. We have teachers who can fill the slots, but it has to do with priorities in terms of what we want the teachers to look like. And do we want our early childhood educators to be legitimate members of the teaching workforce, who are paid on a scale and have the same professional development opportunities as every other teacher in our system, or do we want our teachers to have very minimal qualifications, to not have health care, and to be working on minimum wage? So we have people who will staff the jobs. It's up to us to say what we think these jobs entail. And then we do need to be sure that the higher education development programs are out there for training our teachers, but we have great universities all over Columbus and Ohio who I think can play a role in teacher preparation. But it's up to us to say, this is what we think this job should look like, and we're going to outfit it in that way.
In your opinion, Dr. Justice, do you think we'll be having the same conversation 5 years from now, 10 years from now, saying the teachers are here, they're being graduated, but they're still being paid minimum wage and they're still not getting benefits and we still can't attract them? Do you see any movement in the direction of raising their status?
Well, I think the movements that Steve referenced and that the mayor has referenced, if we significantly fund early childhood, then there will be a workforce developed to fill those slots. I mean, we're not going to have people clamoring to be early childhood teachers to make minimum wage. But if we begin to create a real legitimate early childhood sector across our community, that's a dignified job that is rewarding, that you're not living in poverty, then I think we can create.
If we significantly fund early childhood education, how do you see that happening?
I think that the mayor and the senator and the governor are going to continue to do the work they're doing, and we're going to explore private-public partnerships and social bonds.
So are you optimistic about this?
Well, yes, because everybody came here today. We're all here, and we're part of this conversation, and we want to be here, and we believe in this. And so,
I think this lack of funding that we have right now is sort of a blessing in disguise, because I think it's very important that we do this well. And that means we have properly trained teachers, we have strategies and education systems that are proven to be effective. If, as Angel mentioned earlier, if we dropped a gazillion bunch of money on it right now, we may not have an effective program, and it's a lot harder to undo a system than it is to build a system. So I think we should really take advantage of the lack of total funding for right now and figure out how to do this well and build a system that really accomplishes what we want to accomplish.
Well, let me just say this. If I had more money, I could serve more kids efficiently. That's if it came to the city of Columbus. I don't know about anybody else. And we are very cognizant of the efficiency side of this. We're very cognizant of the quality side of this, and we want it to work. And you're right, we got to figure out how it works the best. So, Senator, just give the money to the city of Columbus.
Well, Fred, I just want to add that, you know, from the federal government, Arnie Duncan has really engaged in the conversation, and I think he's really pushed community conversations, family conversations, so I'm optimistic for our city because we're coming together, and I think that with the federal grant, with the city dollar, everyone is stacking hands. So I've never heard more conversation, and even around business tables, that quality early education has become one of the top priorities. So I'm optimistic, but I don't want to wear rose-colored glasses because, and $5 million is outstanding, Mayor, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have to be, you know, really upfront to say that it's a significant shift in terms of where we focus dollars, its priorities, and it has to look at the system differently. Money doesn't fall from trees, so we have to look at the system differently, and we have to take money from somewhere else and take money from prisons, right, Rich? And we have to take money from somewhere else and invest in early education, and that's, I think, the discussion that we're moving toward having.
I agree with you, Tanny, that I have never been more optimistic than I am today, the direction of pre-K in this community. The private sector has expressed significant interest. We got to figure all that out. The public sector, both at the city, state, and national level, things are lining up. They really are. And I'm a passionate advocate of it, and as well as an executor of the vision. But I'm optimistic, I really am. I have no pessimism in the future of pre-K in the city. The only thing I want to have happen is the dialogue, the conversation needs to be broader than the experts, broader than those who already know about this issue. It needs to reach into our neighborhoods, into our homes, so that we can create political will for public will.
Well, that may be a good now. Do we have any other questions here? Yes, okay.
Roberts, I lead the YMCA here. Thanks. So we run Head Start programs and Early Start Columbus and the state program, and so we have our hands, and we have about 35 openings for preschool teachers, and many of the hundreds of teachers that we employ live at the poverty line and are eligible for many of the services, so I just concur that that's an issue. You know, Tanny sparked my interest when she talked about reallocating resources, and we have a bunch of academic experts here. So last time I was in this room, Bruce Perry was here talking about the developing brain. Is there anybody on this panel that believes that the 4-year-old year, the juxtaposition between the bang for your buck or the ROI you get in the 12th grade of high school, is there any greater difference between what you could get in the 4-year-old year if you took the resources we currently spend on the 12th grade year and reinvested earlier so that we didn't have to find new money?
Dr. Carrington.
Well, I would just say that, that's a sticky question, right? But there have been economists who have tried to sort of answer that question and provide guidance around that. There's the book by Heckman that talks about, he does an analysis in which he shows that if you only have a limited amount of money, and if you put that money towards early childhood education, then that will have a longer, more positive impact, on the population over term than if you wait until sort of high school and try to do some type of remedial intervention. So there is that work out there.
Okay. Do we have, yes?
I have one more comment on that. So we're not in a position where we're going to be able to say, these children didn't get preschool, they have floundered and not received services until they get to high school, and so we're going to pull money that goes to services to help them and put it into early childhood. We're not in a position where we can say, this money goes into prisons, we're going to pull it out of that and put it into early childhood. One of the things that would be very helpful for me to see is, as early childhood spending goes up, we all know that the spending on these extra services for children to get through high school are going to go down. Money going into prisons is going to go down. There's a tipping point somewhere, and it's sort of like when you look at a business plan, and I haven't seen that. I think that would be a very useful tool if we could look at it instead of just saying, oh, we have to pull this funding up and this is going to stay up. No, this is going to go down, but where does it go down, and how can we share that information with the legislature? Because when they're looking at funding an X amount of dollars and looking at, am I going to get reelected if I raise taxes, that's a difficult point for them. So I would love to see that information, that I could take that story forward and say, yeah, to here, but at this point, we're not going to need that much money.
President Obama in his 2013 State of the Union message said one of his goals was preschool for all. So what is the federal government, what is the Obama administration doing as a partner, more than the previous administration, more than in previous years? How would you assess their contribution here? Do we know? Dr. Schoenbaum.
I would say their proposal, if you look at both what they proposed and then the bills like the Harkin-Miller bill that is in Congress at the moment, I think what they did is that they led a conversation, and so I think a lot of folks in states and cities across the country looked at the elements of that proposal because it did emphasize concrete aspects of quality. So things like professional development, some of these kind of nitty-gritty issues, I think I was very impressed by the level of conversation among the federal staff in trying to craft that. Now, of course, the money isn't there at the federal level that that it would take to fully fund preschool for all, but this is all part of a movement, I think, in the right direction. Over 80 to 90% of the American public believes there should be more public investment in preschool education. So the public's there. We know the top quintile has already made their decision. The wealthy in this country, over 90% purchase quality preschool education. So the rest of us have to catch up.
But no additional federal dollars coming in the way of the states as the result of the preschool for all?
Well, there's the, did you want to talk about that? There is the federal preschool grant that has come out in which, and I'm not quite sure what the top, I mean, there's hundreds of millions that have got, there's about 500 million nationwide. Ohio is in the $20 million pool that goes with that. Other states, depending on their population, have more or less dollars coming with that. So that is going out. That is a highly competitive, pardon?
Yes. Soon.
Soon, yes. Yes, I will be leaving here and going back to my grant writing team, and we will be working till tomorrow morning. But yes, there's grants, again, they're highly competitive. We expect to have a strong application, but there's 36 states fighting for 9 awards.
And it also, it's powerful because it's requesting, well, it's demanding that states match it in some form, so it's a partnership. It's skin in the game for the states, as well as the federal. And earlier with the $70 million grant. So there has been, kind of a carrot and stick. There's been a real focus by the federal government to put out these early learning grants. There clearly has been, I think Arnie Duncan was trying to champion, I don't know, was it a gas tax? I can't remember the way he was going to fund our cigarette tax. So you get into a whole discussion of, as Angel talked about, tax increases. But they were trying to find creative or different funding sources for early education, and I applaud their efforts to try to be creative and find those ways.
Do we have any other questions up front here? Anything more? Okay. Any final brief comments from any of the panelists? Anything you'd like to wrap up with here, very quickly?
I was just going to add one last thing, not to harp on this sort of public-private partnership thing, but another thing that I would put forward is sort of at the macro level. I would like to see more of the private partnership stakeholders sort of at these tables and at these meetings when we discuss this. We have million-dollar corporations that are running early education programs like Bright Horizons, the Kiddie Academies, etc. And I think that it's important to sort of have them at the table because they are the ones that are serving these middle-class children who could in some ways subsidize some of the costs for the low-income children.
Well, thank you, panel, very much for being with us today. Thank you for coming. I would like to turn things over to Dean October.
Thank you so much, and that was the first thing I wanted to acknowledge. Wasn't this a terrific panel today? Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you. I also want to thank all of you for attending today. This is, as far as we know, the first time all of you who care so much about young children are all together in the same space, so we can begin a genuine conversation together about what actions we need to take, because this is definitely an issue that's going to take togetherness to resolve, and I think that's been underscored here by all of the speakers. One of the observations I might make here, it's a favorite reflection of my own. If you put children first, you'll almost always make the right decision. And if you put children last, you'll almost always make the wrong decision. So as we're struggling here, trying to figure out how do we fund more and better, higher quality, early child learning experiences, we have to keep pushing children out in front. How do we build that political will? How do we build that economic will? How do we build the public will? We need to keep putting children out in front and underscoring the priority that children should have in our society for the sake of ourselves, for the sake of them, and for the sake of the future. One of the things I do in my own position, I'm always trying to look to the future. I have a crystal ball in my office. I joke about it when people come in. But seriously, I try to look into the future on a regular basis and anticipate what might be coming down the road. We've heard a little bit about the gap today, the achievement gap of youngsters at different income levels and backgrounds. But the bigger fear for me as I look into the future is the gap is going to grow. The gap is going to get bigger by virtue of the difference in technology exposure, technology use. Different children coming from different backgrounds and different experiential bases. So what that means then is what we do as educators all of a sudden takes on even greater importance and greater urgency. So a new study has come out very, very recently. We talked a little bit about quintiles here, so try to say the top quintile now, the top 80 to 100% income level, comparing not just use of the internet, but how well youngsters use the internet and how much and how effective they were in gathering information. The top 20% compared to the next 20%. So we were comparing in that study middle class to high class, highest economic class. The gap was very, very significant, almost to the order of 2 standard deviations, very significant. That study didn't look at then how did children from lower income levels use information, were able to decipher information and determine what is high quality and use critical thinking. So it underscores the need here. It means we need will. It means we need a lot of skill. There's been mentioned today by several different panel members, but we need to hit this nail directly on the head. Quality education won't happen without quality instruction. And quality instruction won't happen without quality teaching. One of the things not mentioned very much, a little bit here and there, was family. A lot of what happens to preschoolers happens in home. We have a lot of in-home care here in Columbus. One of the bright spots out of the work that Steve described here was the impact of coaching on home care results for those children as they took that crawl test and started kindergarten. So one of the things I think we have to look at is how do we improve home care and turn home care into early child learning. We need to do that in addition to preparing professional teachers. We need at least one professional teacher in, I think, every child center. If we could focus that as an early goal here, that could make a tremendous difference, because having one highly qualified teacher who can coach the other teachers at that center, there is real hope in that model. So while we don't have an Army-sized workforce here ready to go, there are steps we can take that will make a very big difference. And I'm excited to have all of you here today. I'm excited for these panelists, because I do believe the will and the potential and the skill exists in this community, and we can help make the world a better place for every single youngster in this city and county. Thank you so very much for coming, and we do have a wonderful reception. I hope we get to mill around, talk with each other. Thank you again from the College of Education and Human Ecology here at Ohio State, along with all of our panelists and the Crane Center. Thank you very much.